Sorry. Bulavinaka, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alfred Ralifo, and I will be a host for this session on turning the tide, preventing plastic pollution in Pacific Island countries and territories. Just a brief introduction. I'm based here in WWF Pacific Fiji office as the Great Sea Reef Program Manager, and I've been working with some of my stakeholders and partners with regards to this policy on preventing plastic pollution in the Pacific and also globally. Plastic pollution, plastic is a material with exceptional properties. Along with being versatile, inexpensive, and durable, it brings significant benefits to society, from enabling effective transport of goods to reducing food waste to protecting human health during critical crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, more than 11 million metric tons of plastic pollutants are flowing into the ocean each year, and there is no sign that leakage rates are slowing. Marine plastic pollution is a global transboundary problem with no regard to national borders. In 2018, an ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics under the UNEA was established to document and extend the plastic pollution and its impacts and to inform governments on the best options to combat marine plastic litter and microplastics. One of the key AHAG findings is the importance of more sustainable management of plastics throughout their life cycle in order to increase sustainable consumption and production patterns, including but not limited to the circular economy. There is now growing momentum amongst member states and non-state actors, including our Pacific Island countries, calling for the development of a new global treaty to regulate marine plastic pollution at the third AHAG meeting earlier this month. 29 major global businesses such as Colgate-Palmolive, Unilever, and Coca-Cola, just to name a few, have signed a manifesto calling on member states to develop a global treaty on plastic pollution. And this number is expected to increase in the very near future. This session strives to highlight how a global treaty would address key gaps in the current global regime governing plastic pollution and augment regional and national efforts to prevent plastic pollution. And our second objective is to explore how Pacific Island states could elevate their perspectives in global policy discussions and champion a global treaty to combat and prevent plastic pollution, reflecting on how such a treaty could meet the needs and priorities of the region. I would like to challenge our esteemed panelists, which I will introduce later, to discuss key gaps in the current frameworks governing plastics and highlight the role Pacific Island states play as champions of a global convention to combat plastic pollution, supporting actions at global, regional, and national levels, and to consider ways to elevate the Pacific Islands perspective as champions in key international fora in the coming year 2021 and 2022. Our esteemed speakers this afternoon, our first speaker will be Ms. Roxanne Blessing. She is the Executive Officer and Environmental Quality Protection Board for the Republic of Palau. And she will be speaking about tackling plastic pollution in Palau and why support for a global treaty to prevent plastic pollution is needed. Our second speaker will be Dr. Sasha Fuller, the Pacific Node Coordinator, Research and Innovation Division of the University of Newcastle, Australia, based in Samoa. And she will be she will be outlining the key legislative gaps and challenges that needs to be addressed by a global framework pursuant to her research team's recent gap analysis. And our third and final speaker is Mr. Setoa Apo, the Principal Waste Officer, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment from Samoa, and he will be presenting on plastic pollution problems, actions, and challenges in Samoa, and on importance of global treaty to help support Pacific countries to navigate the pressures to import plastics. And those are our esteemed speakers for this session. Before we start, I hand over the floor to our first speaker. We are going to be playing a very, very short lightning video, which our technical team will be playing very shortly. And once the end of that video, then I will directly hand over to Roxanne, who will be our first speaker for the session. Also, just a note, if any of you audiences have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And you can then post your questions directly to the whichever of the panelists that you would like to respond to your questions. So without further ado, let's kickstart our session this afternoon with that short lightning video.
island. And I was shocked in the Christmas when I went there. Most of these our shore too with these plastics, and rubbishing our environment and our foreshore end up in the reef. It was shock for me to see that.
If we are irresponsibly dumping waste into the very life systems that we depend on, what we see is a decrease in the health and the abundance of seafood that we rely on, because we're creating an environment that's not conducive to healthy and vibrant populations of fish.
Even with all those measures in place, and even if we as consumers are well informed, better educated, and can make good choices, we can't do this alone.
To globally address this problem, the Pacific has to have one voice. That's why we are opted for a global community to come together, to have a global instrument to tackle this problem. Without that, we'll be facing a huge problem with our ocean.
Handing over the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Roxanne Blossom from the Republic of Palau.
Okay, thank you very much, Alfred, for that introduction. Can everybody see the screen? Okay, perfect. Good morning from Palau. Thank you, colleagues, for this opportunity. Palau is very pleased to be part of this important session on this very important topic of plastic pollution. Turning the tide, preventing plastic pollution in the Pacific island countries and territories. Okay. I'm trying to change slide. There you go. Okay, so my name is Alfred said. My name is Roxanne Blossom, and I'm the CEO of the Environmental Quality Protection Board, which is a semi-autonomous agency of the Palau national government in charge with implementing regulations that overall aims to protect the environmental quality and to ensure public health and ecosystem protection for present and future generations. So Palau is very keen in keeping its brand as a pristine paradise island. Plastic has become an emerging issue that is becoming very threatening to our ecosystem and our public health. And hopefully within this forum, we can all achieve a consensus of finding ways to address this issue of plastic pollution together as a region and as a global parties. So I just wanted to mention very important laws that have become been effective, have become have taken effect in Palau. One is RPPL is Republic of Palau Public Law 1031 is the Beverage Container Recycling Act. The purpose of this law is to charge levy on all beverage containers that are imported in, and then to be able to use and that's 10 cents, and for the 5 cents of that levy would go towards the recycling operations to manage the wastes from these beverage containers. And then 5% of 5 cents goes towards the contractors who are responsible for or to pay back the people who are bringing in the containers for recycling. This Beverage Container Recycling Act is in the process of being reviewed and amended to become a Plastic Container Recycling Act, not just for beverages, but for all plastic containers, including shampoo bottles, lotion bottles, other things. Recently, this law was amended to include all beverages. Initially, it started as just for certain size of containers, and that made the producer smart enough to come up with beverage containers that are outside of that size requirements, and therefore were exempted from paying the tax. And so this bill was amended to include all beverage containers. But now we are in the process. We're working to with our Congress to amend this law to include all beverage containers, all plastic containers. Sorry, and then the second law is the Plastic Bag Use Reduction Act. And the intention of this was to really to address single-use plastic bags. However, it needs some more work to achieve that goal. Right now, it just in the law it requires use of biodegradable bags, but to the extent of what is biodegradable and how long would it, the standards for which we want those bags to be, those weren't really clearly indicated in this act. So it needs to be looked at again, and we're in the process of amending this to really address single-use plastic bag reduction. Then we also have the overarching environmental law in Palau, which is the Environmental Quality Protection Act, and this is what my agency is implementing. It's similar to the U.S. EPA NEPA Act. It is also regulating environmental impact statement for large development projects. Ozone depleting substances, water quality, drinking water quality, pesticides, all of that. But one of the regulations that we have under this act is the air pollution regulations, and it bans open burning of plastics. And it really goes to towards the protection of human health from this. And so this is an overarching regulation that bans burning of plastics. Currently, we have some small scale projects. As we all know, Palau and other small Pacific Island countries have come to rely on plastics a lot, and it really depends on the products that we import. for our consumer use that we end up with these wastes that we have to deal with. There is a small scale project to turn plastics into biodiesel that we use to run small scale generators. And so hard plastics such as the ones you see on the screen are being, instead of normal process where it just goes straight to the landfill, we segregate them and we put them into shredder machine that shreds it down to the content to the far right that you see picture, and we're able to then melt it to make biodiesel for generator. So this is a very small scale project, but while it is small scale, the intention is it's already reducing 26% of all plastic waste from going to the landfill. So that's pretty remarkable, and we continue to make sure that it is done in a way that will not cause any negative environmental impact, and actually would help reduce plastic pollution. We also have these small scale projects where we turn, when lately Palau has been using foams for food packaging. And with this emerging issue of plastic impacts on our health, we're now seeing local communities doing small scale projects with betel nut palms to the leaves that they're turning the leaves, the sheets into plates. And it's really raising popularity in the islands, in Palau and in other islands around us. As you see in the picture, they can be reused a couple of times because they're very well done, and it's it limits the importation of foams into the island. Also just wanted to show why this issue has gained momentum in Palau, this issue of plastic pollution. Just within a couple of months apart, with youths picking up trash along the beaches, you could see that a lot of the trash collected were plastics. And you can see in the picture the devastating, there's foams, there's plastics everywhere that the kids pick up, and it goes to show that it is a really it really is a serious issue. One of the islands that they pick is the very north, is the very most northern state that doesn't have any other state around it, and they would pick up all this garbage 1 week, and they go back 2 weeks later, and the beaches are filled up again. So where does it come from? It certainly doesn't come from any other islands because there's no other islands around there. And so plastics washing ashore is also becoming is a very big issue for Palau. More than half of the trash collected are plastic waste. And so we're very concerned in Palau about plastic impacts. If we see plastics in the ocean, definitely there's going to be microplastics in our reefs. We eat the food in the ocean. What is that impact to us and our health? With those trash collections, we also did water sampling inside the reef in 2 occasions. One was with Nat Geo, the other one National Geographic, and the other one was with a group of students who sailed from Japan to Palau, and during that time they collected water samples. We sent those samples to lab in Monaco, and we're still waiting to see the results. but definitely, microplastics, plastics disintegrates in the ocean, and the microplastics are present. What are in those microplastics? Do they contain POPs? We're waiting for the results, but it's very alarming, especially with islands that rely on the ocean for food security, for economic development, tourism, economy. It's an issue that plastic is an issue that we all need to be mindful of, because small island countries, we are depending on these products that we buy for our economic development, and we get forced to use products whether good or bad. And so we rely on global efforts to ensure that these products that we consume are safe, that are good, are better options than what they are now. That's why Palau is really going and supporting and lobbying with colleagues for a global treaty, a binding global treaty to combat plastic pollution, especially to address the concerns we have on our food and livelihoods and economic welfare, as including our culture, our identity. So yeah, lastly, just really making sure that our health and our environment is safe from plastic pollution. We're only starting to really get into the important discussions on this, and it is the hope of Palau and small island states that we work together to push this agenda forward for a global binding instrument that would help, that would bring global solutions to everyone's benefit. Thank you. That's it from me.
Please stop sharing your screen, Roxanne.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Roxanne, for your very, very informative and interesting presentations. I think just for everybody's information, Roxanne was quite a huge champion, a great champion in the last IHEC meeting, being part of a very, very small delegation from the Pacific that joined the online discussion late at night. She was quite a champion with regards to asking for a global treaty. And at the same time, she was also featured in one of the articles in the Guardians straight after the IHEC meeting. I have a few questions for Roxanne, but I will keep that to the end of the session. I'll now hand over the floor to Sasha. Ladies and gentlemen, I've already introduced Sasha, who is the Pacific Node Coordinator for Research and Innovation Division of the University of Newcastle, Australia. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alfred. Good afternoon and talo falava from Samoa. Thanks to Alfred and Spret for organising this session, and to my fellow panellists, and to all our Pacific Island participants attending virtually today. I'm here today to present research findings on behalf of our research team, Dr. Tricia Farrelly, Dr. Stephanie Burrell, and we gratefully acknowledge the support of the Environmental Investigation Agency, the Centre for International Environmental Law, World Wildlife Fund Pacific, Environmental Law Oceania, Island Sustainability Alliance, and participating countries. Roxanne's provided some background to the regional context of plastic pollution, so I won't spend too much time on this. Just to say that Pacific Island countries and territories are nation states whose territory is comprised mostly of oceans. So it's for this reason that I'm going to refer to these nations and territories as Pacific Large Ocean Small Island Developing States, or Pacific Low SIDS. Pacific low SIDS, as Roxanne pointed out, are severely affected by plastic pollution and are among the world's peoples with the closest cultural, economic, and social ties to the ocean. They're increasingly import dependent. They're threatened by the transboundary movement of plastics. They're threatened by the environmental, health, social, cultural, economic impacts of plastics, and they're deeply at risk of climate change impacts, a threat which is exacerbated by plastic production and pollution. It's easy to see then why one participant in our study referred to plastics as a WMD, or a weapon of mass destruction. Our research aims aim to identify both the limitations and the strengths of countries to be able to prevent the inflow of plastics under current frameworks, and also to understand the challenges facing Pacific LOCIDs that may limit their potential to be able to implement a multilateral plastic pollution convention, but which a global treaty may also help to overcome. The study has comprised two phases. Phase 1 was a policy gap analysis in which we analysed 52 national level publicly available documents, the legislations, policies, plans and strategies relevant to plastic pollution in 10 participating countries. We based our analysis on an adaptation of Pillar 2 of the EIA's proposed multilateral plastic pollution convention. And we completed this phase in August 2020. So the final report and recommendations are available online at the link in the slide. Phase 2 is a narrative analysis involving semi-structured in-depth interviews with key stakeholders. This phase of the research is currently ongoing. So what I'm going to present today here are the preliminary findings of 10 interviews with heads of environment departments, heads of waste divisions, heads of customs departments, and directors and program managers of regional non-government organisations. Our research in the overall study is focused on national action, policy and legislation that sits at the top of the waste hierarchy at prevention, reduction, reuse and repair. So I'm going to move on to the findings of phase 1. The findings of the gap analysis were structured around 5 major themes, and these were adapted from EIA's Pillar 2. They're listed there on the left. Each of the documents, each of the 52 documents, went through a granular analysis according to the sub-themes listed on the left, which are listed also on the horizontal axis up there, but a bit hard to see. The vertical axis lists the 52 documents that we analysed in participating countries. We've removed those today to make it viewing a little easier, but all of these tables can be found and seen easily in the report. The green colour on these tables notes the sub-themes listed or their synonymic phrases. It suggests that they're explicitly addressed in the document. Yellow indicates that the document either partially includes the sub-theme or that the sub-theme is inferred, and red indicates that the sub-theme is absent in the document. For the purposes of today's presentation, I'm going to let the tables speak for themselves and focus briefly on the themes of prevention, management and microplastics. So there's a significant amount of red here in this prevention table compared to the global objectives. A common theme across all the documents was that the policies and plans that claimed plastic pollution prevention as the key objective failed to provide a coherent suite of actions and targets to support that claim's objective. However, some countries are relatively progressive in terms of legally supported market and trade restrictions. For example, a growing number of countries are banning single-use plastic products such as bags and straws. In most countries, however, there is little legislation that protects them or the region from the influx of non-recyclable or hard to recycle, toxic and unnecessary plastic. Because Pacific Island countries do not produce plastics, virgin plastics in this list here refers to the standards, protocols and caps on usage and the domestic manufacture of plastic products. Plastic pollution targets were virtually non-existent across all the documents, and there were no plastic pollution reduction plans. In one regional plan, a plastic pollution target was set, but that 2025 target remained unchanged from baseline volumes. It's unlikely that set targets will be realistic unless they are coupled with a focused and coordinated approach to preventing problematic plastic in the region. Moving on to management, generally the focus on all the documents analysed remained low down on the waste hierarchy, often stopping at waste management, including landfill management or recycling. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but what we're focused on here is pushing interventions further up the waste hierarchy. And recycling does have the potential to move things further up the waste hierarchy. The mostly green sub-theme under standardisation is enforcement, demonstrating that Pacific countries do have a framework that supports the enforcement of prohibitions relating to plastic pollution. Unfortunately, however, our phase 2 findings, which I'll get to later, demonstrate that enforcement is not happening in practice. And now the major theme of microplastics. As you can see, there's a lot of red, and it's good to hear that Palau are doing things in this space. In fact, the only document that references microplastics was Palau, which plans to control virgin pellets, also known as pre-production pellets or noodles, as outlined in Palau's National Solid Waste Management Strategy 2017 to 2026, which Roxanne just mentioned. Overall, the key findings of the first phase of the study identified missed opportunities to implement legislation and strategies to prevent plastic pollution and strengthen existing plastic pollution legislation and policies by shifting the focus further up the waste hierarchy. There appeared to be a lack of access to and interpretation of the latest science-based evidence on plastic pollution, and as a result, few examples of best practice in policy. This is likely the reason for the lack of references across the region in all the documents to microplastics, to plastic additives and monomers, to persistent organic pollutants, to invasive species and pathogens, which are rafted on plastics, particularly in marine ecosystems, and to health relationships with plastics that are associated with the toxic chemical components of plastics. Also, a lack of reference to climate change relationships with plastic production and pollution. There were few traditional or local alternatives to plastics and packaging offered. There's a much greater emphasis on changing existing consumer behaviour and individual responsibility, for example, a great focus on awareness raising campaigns at the community level, rather than a focus on producer and importer responsibility and behaviour change education. That is, there isn't the focus yet on extended producer responsibility. We also identified a lack of interministerial coordination, some of that around waste management, but quite often the sorts of interministerial coordination arrangement missed references to plastics and plastic pollution. The reality is that the current actions, legislation, plans and policies cannot effectively prevent the inflow of plastics into the region. They're not robust. And that brings us to the findings of phase 2, the preliminary findings. The preliminary findings from phase 2 absolutely reinforce the findings from the gap analysis. But what's not reflected in the above mentioned legislation, plans and policy frameworks that the narrative analysis has been able to draw out is the intersection of plastic pollution with, for example, fisheries, climate change, nutrition, health and sanitation, and the global political economy. Findings of phase 2, which I'll focus on now, demonstrate that plastic prevention is a highly contentious political issue. It has changed the waste space in Pacific low SIDS. Waste has always been a political issue, but a national issue. The emerging global politics of plastics, or the political ecology of plastics, has seen a transformation in this space, transforming what is required of waste and pollution control personnel, once national decision makers, into global negotiators. Findings from our interviews demonstrate the tremendous and unrelenting pressure Pacific nations are under to continue to import plastics and at the same time to prevent the inflow of plastics to the region. Our Pacific Islands don't have a lot of transnational corporations, They're under extreme pressure from transnational companies such as, for example, Coca-Cola Amatil. Participants informed us that Coca-Cola are opposing national container deposit legislation so they can control the scheme design and self-regulate. They are an example of a major corporation holding nation states to ransom over waste and plastic pollution policies. In addition to thwarting Fiji's CDL plans, which you can see on the slide, it looks also like Coca-Cola may be trying to influence the direction and scope of CDL in Samoa. And we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there. I'm having some trouble with my clickers, sorry. While Pacific Islands themselves do not produce plastics, they do manufacture plastic products. For example, a number of Samoan-owned water companies bottle water in Samoa. And to do so, they buy resins from importers who have imported pellets for distribution, and they blow these into water bottles. Banning plastic imports is not in the best interest of plastics manufacturers, importers, and suppliers across the Pacific, with representatives from national environment departments stressing the influence importers have over minimising efforts to implement national single-use plastic bans. The increased politicisation of waste because of plastics has seen more interest and recognition of the issues, and it's seen a lot more donor funding in this space. And while the donor funding for plastics and waste is welcome, it is not lost on Pacific leaders that this is a type of checkbook diplomacy that can result in duplication and overlap at the national level and is cause for some frustration for countries. Linked to this is trade agreements, which highlight the powerlessness of national governments to prevent food and waste dumping under their World Trade Organization obligations. For example, New Zealand lamb flaps, which are illegal to sell in New Zealand, are exported to the Pacific. This highlights too the link between food dumping and related disease in the Pacific. One participant stated, "Disease is a huge problem. We're feeding the masses the cheap food, and we're hoping they don't complain and that they die early." Between 2003 and 2017 rather, there were over 20,000 MARPOL violations recorded in the fishing industry, demonstrating, as one participant notes, the fishing vessels are the bad boys. There is little to no enforcement in this area, despite the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission agreement and national MARPOL legislation. One of our participants suggested the reason for this is that powerful distant fishing nations such as China and Japan are responsible for 77% of the incidents. Pacific low SIDS are currently ill-equipped to deal with the politics of plastics. The above external pressures that I've just mentioned have transformed waste management and pollution control in Pacific low SIDS. Technical staff in regional NGOs and national governments have not previously had to deal with the politics of negotiating global power relations and do not have the skills in influencing international policy. But it's not just an issue of technical capacity. Human resources are also stretched. The focus on plastic has added to the workloads of Environment and Customs officers across Pacific Island nations, who, in addition to their full-time jobs, are expected to represent their countries in global fora. And it's for all of these reasons that the participants we've spoken to date have given overwhelming support for a global treaty. For Pacific Island leaders, a global convention will support a shared regional position. It will help address global transboundary challenges. It will promote extended producer responsibility and safe economies. And in so doing, it will help put pressure back on big suppliers. It will support the drafting of international standards so more powerful countries can no longer waste dump products in the Pacific. And it will support local and traditional solutions. And in their support for this global treaty, Pacific leaders have also warned a global treaty must avoid the pitfalls of additional workload pressures and limited technical support and training to Pacific nations. It must have built-in financial mechanism and a mechanism for developing technical capacity for Pacific low SIDS. So what can Pacific Island leaders do? The key to preventing plastic pollution in the Pacific region and around the world is to regulate the most powerful plastic producers at port. And so we make the recommendation for Pacific Island countries to continue to support the development of an international plastic pollution agreement that addresses the full life cycle of plastics, prevention at source, and the transboundary flows of plastic pollution. At the national level, those countries that have enforced bans may wish to consider working with customs, law enforcement and importers to restrict categories of plastics, prioritising a coordinated, collaborative, transparent approach between sectors. Wrapping mandatory product stewardship schemes around difficult to ban products, those products that Pacific Island countries are dependent on that don't have alternatives yet, may also be considered. Current management strategies can be developed to shift responses to the inflow of increasing volumes and increasingly problematic forms of plastic from waste management to waste prevention, using sustainable financing mechanisms, for example, extended producer responsibility or product stewardship schemes. Countries may like to consider a centrally located or regionally coordinated container deposit scheme, particularly for the most recyclable of plastics, PET, to provide the economy of scale required to support struggling national container deposit schemes. Pacific Island countries may legislate backloading and reverse logistics to ensure plastics and other problematic materials are removed entirely from the region at end of life, and that the producers responsible have to manage these at the point of origin. They may consider support for the establishment of the WCPFC compliance measure and strengthen a national MARPOL legislation. And they should seek training and support from global and regional partners and national partners for regional NGOs and national governments. Finally, we've made a key recommendation to support national efforts through the development of a national plastic pollution elimination action plan. National plastic elimination plans would address the full life cycle of plastics, not just the end of pipe management. They would prioritise prevention over end of pipe in general. For example, prioritising prevention over landfill expansion. They would prioritise prevention over false solutions such as bioplastics, waste to energy incineration and downcycling. Due to leaching, we've been alerted to leaching in the science-based evidence of these false solutions. The national plans would include labour laws to support informal waste workers, and legislation would be flexible enough to incorporate new materials as they are released onto the global market. They would also prevent problematic plastics from passing into customs through countries. And they would extend regional efforts and public-private partnerships. Furthermore, a national plastic pollution elimination action plan would support the development of a global convention on plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for your very, very comprehensive and informative presentation. I was so hooked on the presentation that I forgot that we're quickly running out of time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sitor, and then straight after that, we're going to move on to the questions and answer session of this section of this session.
Thank you, Alfred. Talofa lava and greetings from Samoa. Moderators, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sitor Apo, the Principal Waste Management Officer for Samoa's Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. It's a great pleasure and honor to be part of this important conference as part of our collective efforts to find solutions to this horrifying problem. Today, I am representing the Pacific and presenting the plastic pollution initiatives in the Samoan context. Pacific Islanders have a close and deep connection to the marine environment. It's part of our daily lives, and this relationship is well documented in our myths and legends. This unique connectivity put the Pacific Islanders in the forefront of two global environment problems, mainly climate change and plastic pollution. As a matter of fact, as we all witness, we, the Pacific, are recipients of these catastrophic events. Despite for plastic pollution, we only contribute as little as 1.3% of the mismanaged plastic in the world's oceans. A recent study in Pacific found plastic debris in 97% of examined fish species. This is an eye-opener for us and a threat as well to our health, as us in the Pacific are highly dependent on our fish resources for protein. In addition, a survey of 159 coral reefs in the Asia-Pacific region estimated about 111.1 billion plastic items entangled in the corals, leading to abrasion, suffocation, and mortality. A few Pacific Island countries have stepped up in efforts to minimize and control the importation, selling, distribution, manufacturing, and use of single-use plastics, mainly plastic shopping bags, plastic straws, and polystyrene takeaway food containers. These countries are mainly Fiji, American Samoa, Marshall Islands, Northern Marianas, Micronesian state of Yap, Palau, Niue, Vanuatu, Cook Islands, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Samoa have all chosen the battlefield to combat plastic pollution. They have all developed national legal instruments to control and minimize single-use plastic. Problem of plastic pollution in Samoa. As an island, Samoa rely heavily on the ocean and land to provide our food. It is indeed important to our culture and way of life. However, we are highly dependent on import goods and products. As a result, while we are not producers of plastic or plastic products, we are still generating a huge amount of plastic waste that is entering our terrestrial and marine environments. Thus, we are facing the devastating environmental and human health consequences of doing so. The preliminary findings from the IUCN and World Bank waste audit undertaken by Asia Pacific Waste Consortium earlier this year show that at least at the household level, Samoa is generating about 209 tons per year of PET containers alone. An estimated of 186 tons are entering and leaking into our environment. PET beverage bottles account for 87% of PET waste, while PET purity and personal care bottles, cooking oil bottles together account for an additional 9% of PET waste. HDPE beverage bottles account for 80% of HDPE waste, while HDPE purity and personal care bottles, along with home care bottles, account for additional 46% of HDPE waste. We are currently generating almost 30 tons per year of single-use plastic in Samoa. This is somewhat reduced because of our single-use plastic ban came into effect. Our response and action. In Samoa, we are currently banning the importation, selling, distribution, manufacturing, and use of plastic shopping bags, plastic bagging bags, and plastic straws. The ban on all polystyrene takeaway food containers and cups will come into effect in February 2021. And we are still exploring to include more items in the future. The cabinet in support issued a strong directive to all government agencies to refrain from using styrofoam food containers for refreshments for meetings and official functions. Notable single-use plastic bags, which are banned in Samoa, are currently seen entering the landfill in larger quantities that they are imported. This could be due to residual plastic bags in circulation before the ban was introduced, and highlights the importance of having a single-use plastic bag importation ban in place. Early results show that the number of plastic bags found in Samoa's waste stream are now less than found in Solomon Islands and Tuvalu, which had no ban at the time of the audit, but are more than found in Vanuatu and Palau, which had bans in place well before the waste audit was conducted. We are also currently working towards an advanced recovery fee deposit, which is similar to container deposit levy adopted by some Pacific Island countries. It is estimated that a deposit scheme could achieve a 77% recovery of containers that were destined for leakage. There are some reasons why some more opted to the single-use ban. For example, at least huge amount, million tons of plastic pollute the ocean, threatening thousands of marine species, and it's already happening. Studies found if no action is taken now, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean by the year 2050. In addition, as Sasha mentioned, there are impacts, socio-economic impacts of plastic. First, aesthetic mechanisms, which affects tourism industry and trade by presence of waste. Physical mechanisms, animal wounding or entrapment, physical damage to infrastructure, hazards to navigation and safety at sea. Third, financial burden of waste and cleanups management. And lastly, chemical mechanisms, ecosystem and species damage, contamination of food supply, absorption of heavy metals and organic contaminants. As a result, Samoa has demonstrated its commitment towards single-use plastic ban, includes most voluntary commitments during the International Ocean Conference in 2017. And the Cabinet directive after our Prime Minister returned from the 48th Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting, which fast-tracked the development of policies and legislation. We developed a legislation in September 2018, and it was endorsed by the Cabinet in November of the same year. And it came into effect in January 2019. Some of the highlights of our efforts was the greening of Pacific camps last year in collaboration with SPREP and other agencies and donor partners. And it was the first ever green regional sporting event, and hosting more than 50,000 athletes, officials was a challenge for us. However, we managed successfully to have a plastic-free games. Challenges: our single-use plastic bans will not solve this problem alone. We have introduced our plastic bans, but the audit data shows that there is a huge problem in recovery of plastic. Currently, we are recovering and storing only 5 tons of the 5,979 tons per year of plastic that we import. Currently, none of this is recycled. These plastic items include flexible film and other plastics, reusable plastic bags, single-use plastic, PVC, polystyrene, PP, LPDPE, HDPE, and PET containers. Unlike metals and electronic waste, it is found that waste generation of plastic is at least 50% of the rate of import across all categories. From the 5,979 tons per year of plastic that we import, we are generating an estimate of 3,065 tons of waste, a large amount of which won't make it to the landfill, polluting our natural environment, our waterways, oceans, our soil, and our fish stocks. Importation of plastic products and packaging continues to be a major issue, and we face many external pressures to continue import plastic products and packaging, for example, PET soft drinks. We lack the scientific data and evidence of the transboundary problem of plastic and the impact of plastic and microplastics on our environment. We need this data to inform policy development. We cannot solve this problem alone. We cannot solve these problems without a global framework. To conclude, a global legal binding agreement to prevent plastic pollution will put pressure on importers, producers of plastic. It would help us deliver a more coordinated national response to plastic pollution because our environment agency, our customs agencies, and other agencies will be bound by the same global obligations. We need our voices to be heard in the global arena. We need to work together as one planet instead of coming as different nations and different regions. And we continue on fighting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seto, for such a very informative and a great presentation. And now we have come to our question and answer session. section of this session. And just for your information, Ms. Roxanne had to actually leave immediately after her presentation because she has an urgent meeting with her new president, and she sent her apologies. However, she had made a request that there are opportunities for you to be able to direct a contact straight away using the conference platform, either through messages or through establishing a meeting with her by looking up her profile. For this session over here, we have quite a few minutes left, but I will open the floor to our participants. Anyone who would like to ask a question directly to our speakers, please, you can use the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen, and our technical team can then unmute you and you can raise the questions. If we do not have time for everybody to be able to respond to all the questions that you want to ask, I would like to also reiterate that we do have opportunities later on after this session, which you can message our speakers directly or establish meetings using the conference platform. So over to our technical team, if there's anyone who would like to ask a question directly to our speakers. I also have some questions to ask if our audience do not have any questions to our speakers. Okay, so I just wanted to pose this question to our speakers, generally to anyone who can respond to the questions. What are your thoughts in terms of how the life cycle impacts of plastics is linked to climate change and resilience in our Pacific Islands?
Yeah, hi, I can give that an answer. You know, so plastics are produced from a fossil fuel, so there's a direct link to climate emissions or carbon emissions that directly cause climate change, anthropogenic climate change. There's also a link in disaster waste. So Pacific Islands are already vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Cyclones and extreme weather events mean that waste gets washed up, it gets more polluted. So the intensification of these weather events is causing plastic pollution to spread further and is having a direct impact on terrestrial and marine ecosystems in the Pacific. So there's definitely a direct link between plastic pollution and climate change. Thanks, Alfred.
Alfred, I just want to add on to what Sasha said. In the case of Samoa, one of the most prominent problem that we have, you know, regarding to plastic pollution and climate change is open burning. So it's already regulated on our act, and we're still doing the monitoring of open burning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sitor. And I'd also like to add that in one of the consultations that I had with some of the communities that we've worked with here in the Pacific, one of the issues highlighted as we were doing consultations to develop their disaster risk reduction plan, the community stated that the amount of plastic in the rivers and in the waterways when they flow down towards the sea, they get trapped by the mangrove roots in the mangrove system, and that interferes with the hydrology and the flow of the river and further creates or exacerbates the chances and vulnerability towards flooding during heavy rainfall. So I guess there's lots of examples that we can draw from. I also have another question, and I think this question is specifically for Roxanne with regards to the small scale plastic reducing projects that they have in Palau, but maybe one of you two could actually respond to that. The question is specifically on and it states, are there any limitations of the small scale plastic reducing projects that can be resolved so that these methods can be applied on a larger scale here in the Pacific to other parts of the Pacific?
I was just going to let Satoa answer that one because he's responsible for, you know, implementing the plastic bans at the national level.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Alfred. Regarding to the question for those small-scale projects that are being implemented in Palau, one of the limitations is the sort of technology that they are using. So probably next year we're going to have a small-scale project too. We're using plastic from waste to product concept, and it's going to be pilot for 12 months. And then we will see from there. We have seen what Palau has been doing in small scale. And then after that 12 months, we're going to do evaluation and when to come up with a decision to upscale that technology. Thank you.
And I'll just add that we'd really like to see countries focus at the top of the waste hierarchy. So things like waste to energy could potentially be this false solution that I was talking about. So we have to just, be careful that we're not promoting false solutions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha and Seto. So we have come to the end of our session, and it's time for me to wrap up. And I'd like to acknowledge our speakers this afternoon for such an excellent job, and also for the technical team for connecting us and ensuring that the session runs smoothly without any technical glitches. Just to sum up, I think based on the presentations from our colleagues from Palau and also from Samoa, there is a huge effort that has been undertaken at the national level to address marine litter and plastic pollution. And also there is a coordination and cooperation at the regional level with regards to some of the initiatives that are trying to help Pacific Island countries address plastic pollution at the regional level. But I think based on the legislative analysis that was facilitated by Sasha and her team, there is a huge gap that we need to, that still exists with regards to holistic approaches towards eliminating plastics from nature. And this is something that we feel that that a global treaty is needed to be able to do this, because the Pacific Island countries are mostly located towards the end of life cycle of the marine plastic, and a coordinated effort at a global level with agreed goals and targets supporting national and regional efforts is needed. So thank you once again to our esteemed speakers, and for all the audiences who have joined us this afternoon, tuning in from wherever you are. Thank you very much, and please continue to use the conference platform to be able to connect with each other and share ideas, and to continue to network and discuss how we can move from here forward. Thank you very much, and see you later on.
Thanks, Alfred. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all, guys. Thank you all. Excellent presentations. Thanks, Alfred. Very well led.
My first moderator session.
Well done. It was excellent. Excellent.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.